Miss Albanese, you are a witch, and this report is another page in your spell book. You have tried to curse Israel with lies and hatred, but your poison has failed.
If in 2025 it was still legit to use witch as a behavioral control, behavioral threat against a woman, I think it's safe to say that, if you haven't noticed, taking upon yourself the label witch and going under its cape, it means something. It doesn't just mean witchcore and aesthetic. It doesn't just mean escapism. It doesn't just mean that you actually can be on the side of the oppressor, which is the system, which at the moment is a golden cow, apparently, in the White House. No, it doesn't work like that. Words have meaning that is built over centuries. And so, because some people genuinely ignore and go proud of their ignorance about how intrinsically related the concept of activism and the word witch are, well, kids, school is in session. So let's define activism, first of all, because there's been confusion even about that, if it's possible. If we understand activism as a series of actions of resistance against a system of rules that are established as lawful and defended as such, even when they are unfair or unjust rules, well, then the entire existence of the concept of witchcraft can be identified as a form of activism. That's it. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. See you in the next video. I mean that at 360 degrees, by the way. Whether you consider witchcraft just as a series of rituals, spells, and magic, or if we want to consider witchcraft historic, and so the witchcraft trials, where basically the accusation of witchcraft was moved against women to limit and bound their abilities to be individuals, guess what? In both cases, there was an action against a system that was unfair and unjust, but defended by the law. We used magic, rituals, spells to control things that we couldn't control with the means that were given to us by the system and the laws. And at the same time, the very existence of women that would not fall in line with the patriarchal development of capitalism, that just wanted women to be wives and mothers, not independent in any form, not owning any kind of property, and once the age has passed for popping out children, you just have to disappear, and if not, suddenly you're a crone, you're a witch, and we will burn you at the stake for it. Like, the existence of women, we have literally just seen, is still threatened when the word witch is used. And if the word witch is used against a woman, it means that she's doing something that the system does not like, and the system will try to put her down, giving that name to her. And believe you me, the witch trials are not that far away. And again, I am not inventing anything. These fuckers. Well, first of all, looking at the witch trials, which if you are a modern witch and you don't know why you're using the word, you have never looked into the witch trials, well, you should. And not the tail end of the witch trials, which are the trials of Salem, Massachusetts, but actually the stuff here in Europe. That would help. And in the stuff here in Europe, 75%, possibly over, of the people accused of witchcraft were women. So if that doesn't already suggest to you that there's an issue with the system and women were sort of the victims and needed to create resistance, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's, what do you think you're here for? I don't know. It's just baffling to me. Just cruising through life without understanding the meaning of words. And this is my second language. Which, by the way, is the reason why occultism, ceremonial magic, no, you're right, that's not automatically witchcraft. The fact that it was mainly practiced by men, or men were at the top of the hierarchies, kind of the reason why. Looking at the records of the witch trials, which if you are a modern witch and you use the word witch to define yourself, maybe you should know where the word comes from and what it actually means and who were the people that were given that name. Just a thought, because otherwise you might find yourself being pretty silly in some situations, like the fact that I'm here and I have to explain you this, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. The point is, these women tended to be outside the bounds of the system and the role that the system wanted for them, which in early modern time was mainly being a wife and a mother. So the first kind of woman that was very problematic and therefore accused to be a witch, and I think the first witch in Europe was actually this kind of woman, Alice Kyteler, we'll talk about her in a second. These women, for some very unlikely reasons, because at the time women couldn't quite own or have property to their name, but you know, if your father and your brother and your husband all die and there's no other family members that are men to inherit, then you get to inherit something as a woman. And if you get to inherit something as a woman, you get to be independent. You don't need to have a man to tell you how that money will be spent, which was a thing back in the day. Widow needed to put back under the supervision of brothers or fathers because they were not considered able to think and manage things. And that was actually a consequence of this. To these women, an accusation of witchcraft meant simply that her possessions could be repossessed by the government or the church. It was as simple as that. It's a woman that gets to have ideas and do things and be independent. No, absolutely not. They're gonna get ideas in their head, and so, witch, you're a witch. And whichever the outcome was, whether you were actually killed, murdered as a witch, or not, your stuff, your land, your properties were repossessed anyway. So the problem was solved there, to a degree. The other kind of woman was either barren and so could not provide to the newly colluding patriarchy and capitalism the function of the labor of reproduction and being in the house and minding the children. So if you're barren and you cannot have children, you cannot be a wife and you cannot be a mother. Or if you're too old at that point to have children, so you're postmenopausal, so you're a crone, and you're at that point likely a vagrant, because if you're a woman that is that old and gets to go around and beg for her food, it means that your family is dead. You are no longer valuable to society because you're not a wife or a mother. And suddenly, when you're begging and you're asking for food and the request is denied, and you send them a curse under your breath because you're hungry, oh, thou art a witch. That was genuinely enough to claim that the woman was a witch. She was accused of witchcraft, and the nuisance of being asked for food was dealt with that way. This is, by the way, what we say when we say that they burnt women, not witches. So if you are wrapping yourself in the word witch, thinking that the only meaning of that word has to do with rituals and with spells, study your history, because that's not the case. We're going to get into the 70s and how feminists reclaimed the word witch, whether they were practicing witchcraft or not, exactly because of that. Most importantly, in the early modern era, what you think can now be separated, and so, oh, I just want to be a witch because I do my spells, and if you want to be an activist and call yourself the witch, oh, those things would be separate. And at the time, they couldn't even be. The Malleus Maleficarum that was written with a level of misogyny that to this day, it's hardly paralleled, was tarring all women as potential witches because they were naturally closer to the devil by their very nature of being women. Do you not understand why you're existent as a woman in this world if you do not constantly bend your head to patriarchy is resistance in and of itself? Like, I can't believe that there are women that do not understand this, but I guess that's part of what liberation is supposed to be, education, and hence I'm here. The history of witchcraft is the history of the intrinsic misogyny of institutions like the Catholic Church, which are so profoundly patriarchal that they will find spiritual, higher law and justifications to hurt women who do not fall in line with the only patriarchal priority, which is having wives and mothers. Like, it seems insane that I have to explain this, but okay, we're here again. We're just here again.
Of note is the misogyny contained within the Malleus Maleficarum. The resultant dynamic saw significantly more women being prosecuted than men. Indeed, Kramer wrote that women were far more susceptible to being deceived by the devil. Kramer was quite scathing of women, with many passages of his book citing such in no uncertain terms. He clearly stated that since women are feebler both in mind and body, it is not surprising that they should come more under the spell of witchcraft. Kramer further accused women of being like children intellectually, with weak memories and prone to acts of impulse. He even claimed they were more carnal than men, describing their lust as insatiable. His astonishing logic is that women were made from a rib which is bent, as opposed to men being made from straight dust, and therefore women are made with a defect and always deceive. As a result, women in society, Kramer argues, are unable to govern themselves. Of particular importance to Kramer was the subject of midwives, whom he accused of causing miscarriages, procuring abortions, and offering newborn children to devils or even devouring them upon birth. As such, midwives represent the nadir of witches and witchcraft, and receive significant attention within the pages of the Malleus Maleficarum. According to historian Robin Briggs, from 1450 to 1750, there were an estimated 100,000 witch trials, resulting in 40,000 to 50,000 executions, and it is estimated that between 75% and 80% of them were women.
I feel like I've been repeating things and giving reading lists, and people still dare to come to my comments and say witchcraft doesn't need to be political, you can be a MAGA witch. And I'm just like, no, you can say it and you can show that you're ignorant, but you cannot be a MAGA witch. You cannot be a witch that ignores what happens in the world, because otherwise you're cosplaying as a witch. You do not understand where the word comes from, the meaning that it carries, and who were the women that were called witches, and what it means that calling someone a witch was a death sentence. Do you genuinely think that you can go with that name and not thinking that it carries any kind of weight from the historical meaning of it? Again, the Malleus Maleficarum made absolutely no difference in whether you're a woman or you're a witch. If you're a woman, you're likely a witch, just because by your nature you were closer to the devil and you were weaker and therefore easier to tempt. Like, the level of misogyny that comes from some of the writings, from saints, from Catholic saints, is something that I don't understand how even people that genuinely believe in Jesus can go to church knowing what that institution has done and keeps promoting, because the simple existence at this point of the Catholic Church is what allows the Christofascism that we see in the US.
Condemned in tens of thousands for witchcraft, for cursing crops, or for dancing with the devil, starting from the late Middle Ages, women faced a grim fate in civil and ecclesiastical courts, and throughout Europe. They were horrendously tortured and then almost always burnt in public squares. They were easy targets. It was practically femicide on a large scale, institutionalized by the Church's age-old misogyny. Civil and ecclesiastical judges, including the fearsome Inquisition, relentlessly persecuted these unfortunate women who were almost always poor, ignorant, marginalized peasants, extracting supposed demonic signs through absurd, irrational trials and tortures, driven only by the need to find easy scapegoats, obviously serving the powers that be. When talking about witches, one thinks of Halloween or the Tofana with their funny black costumes and hats, without realizing that centuries ago an unspecified but very high number of women were killed. There is almost no awareness of this story. In Italy, the last victim to be burnt at the stake was a peasant woman named Maria Bertoletti, known as Toltina. She was sued in 1715 for witchcraft in Brentonico, Trentino, and was tried by Captain Giovanni Luigi Sartori, who condemned her for the crimes of maleficium, sacrilege, infanticide, idolatry, apostasy, sodomy, Sabbath, fascination, poisoning, and having sexual relations with Satan. In 2015, the municipality of Brentonico reopened the case, discovering that the woman was sane and was killed over an inheritance dispute. Saint Joan of Arc, canonized only 4 centuries later by Pius X, was sent to the stake as a heretic and for wearing men's clothing.
Some of the first witch trials and witch burnings, because they like to burn them there, despite the belief that we have here in the UK that no, the main form of execution of a witch was drowning, probably here in the UK, but alas, where I come from, Italy, they really like to burn their witches. It's not just saying. And they started to have witchcraft accusations in the early 1200s. In the early 1200s in North Italy, we started to have this panic around women, okay? Like, and, you know, there's something about, I understand why some people would like to be able to disentangle the idea of, oh, the women accused during the witch trials were accused just because they were women. And I'm thinking of myself as a witch, as in a practitioner of witchcraft. Don't worry. Italy gives you even that. Because, yes, we go after women, just because they're women, just because they have possessions, just because they're too old to be useful. In Italy, we actually have people that tried to help their community. We have the canning folks. And I'm sure that there were people like that around, but I know how, you know, there's a partial mistake in the activism and feminism side of things that also denies that there was ever any woman that actually practiced anything that wasn't sanctioned by the church. And that's also not the case. In Italy, we had those examples. Fair enough, the first woman that is considered to be the one accused of witchcraft, firstly in Europe, is an Irish noblewoman of Flemish origin called Alice Kyteler. And the trouble with Alice was exactly the first example that I gave you, which is she had property to her own name. She buried 4 husbands, and she inherited from each and every one of them. She was running an inn, and at some point, the children that the husbands had in previous marriages decided to accuse her of witchcraft because she was inheriting part of her inheritance. That's all there was.
The children of her deceased husbands came together with the idea that Dame Kyteler had murdered the first 3 and was poisoning the 4th, not just by practical means, but by employing witchcraft. Dame Alice Kyteler's inn was indeed prosperous, and in looking back at the time through modern eyes, it's easy to believe that she was targeted for little more than being a successful female in the world of business.
Like, this woman actually married their father died, and they were just like, nah, I don't want to really give you my inheritance. I would like you to be a witch so that, despite the fact that you married and endured my father, I want to get all the money, please. And that's what happened to Alice. And then we have one of the most well-known witches in Italy, La Strega de Ipa Bianca, Matteuccia da Todi. And Matteuccia was genuinely like the kind of cunning folk that we still have in Italy. So she was making the odd love potion. People were coming from her region to be healed by her because clearly she was doing some kind of segnature. Again, still done in Italy. And when she started to be inconvenient to men...
To a woman who was beaten daily by her husband, who also cheated on her, Matteuccia advised to keep the water he used to wash his feet to then serve it back to the husband as a drink, along with a meal made of swallows and sugar. To a young man in love who didn't get permission to get married to the woman he loved, she advised to stand by a crossroad with a candle and to repeat a charm while his lover was getting married to another man. This way, the husband would have never been able to consummate the wedding. The remedies given by Matteuccia were taken very seriously as a proof of collusion with the devil, even though these actions don't sound like they'd warrant such accusation.
We started to accuse her. We brought her in, we tortured her, and suddenly, after we torture her, suddenly on top of the potions and the healing, she admits to flying backwards on a demon to the walnut of Benevento, to the Sabbath, and to conspire with the devil. And I guess that, you know, after torture, you kind of tell them whatever they want to hear at some point, just so that they stop torturing you. So I think it's very interesting that the line between, oh, I'm just doing potions and helping the people that come to me, and oh no, I consort with the devil, the difference between the two is torture. And Matteuccia was actually burnt at the stake for it. There's the example of Giulia Tofana, which I think it's an amazing example of bringing literally together women that are trying to make resistance and do something against patriarchy with something that sounds like a potion, and probably at the time was seen as a potion, a magic potion. In reality, it was poison. It was a water made with arsenic and other toxic elements. And you know what the point of Giulia Tofana was? And at some point, she had a gang of women that were actually bringing around the Aqua Tofana, the Tofana water. And you know why? Because women in Italy in the 1600s had absolutely no recourse if their husband was beating them, hurting them, raping them. They couldn't even, there wasn't an option for anything about separation or divorce. You were sold by your father to your husband and you had to endure. And some of the endurance to be had was so bad that Giulia Tofana came up with this water that she was selling to some women. But when the women that were going to her were too poor to pay and still needed help because there was nothing that they could do to defend themselves from their husbands, she would give them the water for free. There was a process of subsidy in this underground community of women where the rich women that could pay would pay for the Aqua Tofana, and the poor women that still needed help against their violent husbands would get the Aqua Tofana for free just to help them. Tell me that that's not witchcraft and tell me how it's not one of those things. Tell me.
Perhaps the most interesting aspect of the case of Aqua Tofana is the distinct clientele of the operation. Women driven to such desperation within marriage that murder was the only option that they felt they had, Renaissance ideals of rebirth did not apply to rights for women, whose status remained much like the Middle Ages, property of a father or husband, and therefore at their mercy. Though individual distributors in Tofana's gang specialized in different social circles, clients came from all classes. Some poor women were even given the poison free of charge, the motive of money being superseded by pity or retribution. The ringleader, Tofana, died peacefully and was never charged of any crimes, but her accomplices did not share the same luck. A client admitted to a priest during confession that she had plotted to kill her husband, and at the offer of immunity, this story was leaked. On July 6, 1659, the 5 gang members were hung before a notably large crowd.
And much as there is still discussion about how Giulia Tofana herself died, some say that she just died in her sleep, some say that she was actually tried and accused as a witch and then killed in an unspecified way. But what we know is that of the group of women that were helping her, 5 were hanged. 5. Why? Because they were helping women with these potions. When the Enlightenment comes, and clearly we were all laughing around because clearly there is no such thing as a witch because there's no such thing as magic, do you think that they apologize to any of the women that they have killed? We're still going through the requests to government to make declaration of apologies and of pardons to women that were burnt or killed as witches. To this day.
Maidstone Borough Council leader Stuart Jeffrey has written to the government calling for legislation to grant a general pardon to victims. The government said a royal pardon could be granted in incredibly rare cases under the royal prerogative of mercy, but there were several conventions that were considered when an application is made after a person's death. The women killed in 1652 and others executed under the Witchcraft Act 1562 remain victims of a huge injustice rooted in misogyny, Jeffrey wrote. According to a pamphlet written that year, some of the women confessed to being pregnant not by any man, but by the devil. Others did not bleed or feel pain after a pin being thrust to the head into one of their arms, the author claimed. Jeffrey told the government that the women were persecuted due to their social status, gender, and perceived nonconformity, and described their deaths as acts of murder.
In 1852, that's the first time that we get someone to suggest that maybe the witch trials were a tad bit a manifestation of misogyny.
Matilda Joslyn Gage strongly criticised the witch hunts that took place throughout the 1600s, interpreting them as a church-supported means of dominating and intentionally killing women. Gage uses her book Women, Church and State, the original exposé of male collaboration against the female sex, to highlight the connections between the church's core beliefs, restriction of women by both the church and state, and the extremes of the witch trials. She highlights this connection by arguing that one is able to understand the oppression of women that stemmed from the church on a deeper level if the term women is substituted for witches. Gage also asserted that educated women who opposed the patriarchy were viewed as a threat to the church and thus more likely to be accused of witchcraft. The witch was in reality the profoundest thinker, the most advanced scientist of those ages. The persecution which for ages waged against the witches was in reality an attack upon science at the hands of the church. As knowledge has ever been power, the church feared its use in women's hands and levelled its deadliest blows at her.
In 1852. About a decade later, there's a book by Jules Michelet, Satanism and Witchcraft, takes up the same idea.
According to Michelet, medieval witchcraft was an act of popular rebellion against the oppression of feudalism and the Roman Catholic Church. This rebellion took the form of a secret religion inspired by paganism and belief in fairies, organized by a woman who became its leader. The participants in the religion met regularly at witches' sabbaths and black masses. Michelet's account dwells on the suffering of peasants and women in the Middle Ages, and writes that history should concentrate on the people and not only its leaders or its institutions, put him ahead of his time as a writer of microhistory. Michelet was one of the first people to attempt to give a sociological explanation of the witch trials and interprets the source material very literally.
The church was simply suppressing anything and anyone that was going against their doctrine. Just before the witch trials, what did we have? The persecution of the heretics. Who were the heretics? Still Catholic and Christian people, just deciding not to go along with every single bit of the doctrine of Rome. Those were the heretics. And then we get to the 20th century, and admittedly, I will give you this. One of the main reasons why the concept of witches and witchcraft that then came to Wicca and then came to us came from Margaret Murray. And as Tabitha Stanmore said better before me, never a woman achieved so much by being so wrong. Margaret Murray was an Egyptologist of sorts, an archaeologist. She was of a rich family, so she could go places and just ask to do stuff, and she could do it. And in the 20s, she publishes a book.
Murray volunteered as a nurse for the war effort, but became sick and was sent to recuperate in a small town in Somerset, Glastonbury. Glastonbury was the legendary home of King Arthur's Holy Grail and a nexus point for folk tales of the occult. Murray, seeing parallels with her Egyptology work, started digging through documents, and in 1917 she published Organizations of Witches in Great Britain in the Folklore Journal. That dry-sounding paper became her book, The Witch Cult in Western Europe, and kick-started a vein of research that would fundamentally change the face of witchcraft as we know it.
The Witch Cult in Western Europe, where she states as a fact that actually the witch trials were persecuting women that were maintaining this pre-Christian pagan tradition to the god and the goddess, which is literally what Gerald Gardner then based Wicca upon.
Regardless of their opinions on Murray, most Wiccans would concede that her work may not have been accurate, but it did facilitate the popularity and legitimacy of their belief system. The witch cult of Western Europe had a catalyzing effect. It brought witches, real witches, not devil worshippers or victims of circumstances, into the public realm. Like some Christians who read the Bible as a creation myth and not as historical fact, many Wiccans now embrace the spirit of Murray's findings, not the fallacy. It actually does not matter whether, or to what extent, Murray was right or wrong, or that Gerald Gardner made it up or not, says Ashley Mortimer, Director of the Centre for Pagan Studies and a trustee of the Doreen Valianti Foundation. The system that was developed works for its purpose, which is religious and spiritual development, and that in itself is enough.
All of her theories have been discredited point by point from the 60s onwards. But because Margaret Murray was so popular and well-known and rich that at the time she wrote the entry for witchcraft in the Encyclopedia Britannica.
As a result of her work in this area, she was invited to provide the entry on witchcraft for the 14th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1929. She used the opportunity to propagate her own witch cult theory, failing to mention the alternate theories proposed by other academics. Her entry would be included in the encyclopedia until 1969, becoming readily accessible to the public, and it was for this reason that her ideas on the subject had such a significant impact. It received a particularly enthusiastic reception by occultists such as Dion Fortune.
You can understand why those ideas, whether they were true or not, sort of got in the imagination of people, and that's what, again, first supported the creation of Wicca by Gerald Gardner in the 40s. That's the reason why the entire foundation of Wicca is created. It's fine, it's fair, as long as we acknowledge that despite the impressions or claims, no, Wicca is a religion created ex novo by Gardner, taking things from the Golden Dawn, from the 1800s, taking things from the idea of Margaret Murray. Like it's all that. It's created. It's not something that has survived through the centuries and we based ourselves upon it. We talked about it before in our Why Are So Many Witches TERFs, which, again, I can't imagine that being TERFs, they're also magas, so I'm talking about the same people here. But this romanticization that we do about the past, unfortunately, we do it a lot in the witchcraft community, and it's very dangerous because it's one of the main points of fascism, make you nostalgic about the past, telling you, then give me your freedom, I will bring you back to the past. Mussolini created and invented fascism, giving to Italy the idea that we can go back to the glory of the Rome days. Like, come on! Again, this timeline shows that if Wicca was influenced by this, believe me, the entire reason why you know, let alone you can call yourself a witch today, comes from that. Comes from the fact that even in the most romantic ideas of Margaret Murray's, witches were seen as women that had resisted against the system of the Catholic Church. Guess what that's called? Activism! Then we get to the 60s when we have the civil rights movements, and the 70s when we have the women liberation movements.
Within the women's liberation movement, Murray's work inspired a witches' liberation movement that gave rise to numerous feminist groups in the United States, particularly in New York starting from October 1968. By proposing to rehabilitate the term witch through the deconstruction of negative stereotypes associated with the term, the movement reinterpreted it as a symbol of female resistance.
And at that point, we start to have the word witch used in a way that it's reclaimed. I don't think it's by chance that therefore we had people like the original Activist Witch, which is Starhawk, which has many faults. We can discuss it another time. But as someone that goes by Activist Witch, I kinda gotta give credit because history is important. Who is the OG Activist Witch that openly said, I'm an activist and my witchcraft is part of activism? And that's Starhawk.
Reclaiming as a tradition was born out of activism. If we believe that nature is sacred, we must take action to protect and regenerate the environment around us. If we believe that each one of us is an embodiment of the goddess, the divine force of creativity and compassion, we must work for social justice as well. We were feminists concerned about how power was distributed by gender, and we saw patriarchal religions as reinforcing that inequality, as well as the whole family of related isms, racism, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, environmental degradation, and more. Creating a new spiritual tradition that honoured women, diversity, and the earth, that was rooted in social and environmental justice for us, was a political act.
Feminists in the 70s recognized that calling a woman a witch was a behavioral threat put on them by patriarchy. And that's why having more freedom and starting to have laws that allow them to divorce, that allow them to actually work, that allow them to open a business without the permission of a man in her family, they gained this independence and they were therefore allowed to reclaim the slur, the accusation of witch, because being accused of being a witch did not necessarily mean that they were actually going to be persecuted legally like it used to happen. Rightfully, the moment that you have a tiny bit of freedom it's easier to reclaim a slur into a word of power. And it's not like the word witch stopped being used as an insult at the time. I think at some point Yoko Ono made a song that is literally called Yes, I Am a Witch. Imagine why. Because she was seen as this horrible woman that has broken up the Beatles. Not true. Go watch Lindsay Ellis' video to understand why. Again, that's just misogyny. And when misogyny manifests itself, what do we say? We call women witches.
We women are all witches. Witches are magical people. We are here to heal this planet and let it shine, and we will.
Guess what? Whether they practice or not. It's just a catch-all. Stevie Nicks, the arguably inspiration for Florence Welch, now going around with all the witchy aesthetic but not calling herself a witch, never admitted to be a witch. Fair play. Had the aesthetic, we liked that, it was the 70s. She had to stop wearing black because the dawn of the satanic panic was so strong that the fact that people called her a witch, and even if she had denied to be one, she started to receive death threats for that from Christians.
The focus was a rumour Nicks had been refuting since introducing Rhiannon as a song about an old Welsh witch in 1975. It wasn't so much that the description fit the song, but the song was indicative of Nicks' tumultuous relationship with Mac's guitarist Lindsey Buckingham. Could Nicks herself have been the witch she was referring to? Nicks ardently sought to rid herself of this depiction amidst severe backlash and death threats.
We're talking about the late 70s, early 80s, okay? It's not centuries ago, it's now. And even the reclamation of the word witch by feminists didn't always go well. The first stuff that the collective under the word witch did was incredibly problematic, and the woman behind it was a bona fide TERF.
Witch was formed when the New York Radical Women, NYRW, split in 1969. The group's main founder was Youth International Party co-founder Nancy Kirschen. Several politicos within the NYRW, most notable Robin Morgan, were inspired by the actions of the Youth International Party, or Yippies, which had been founded in December 1967 and which sought to promote its message by shocking and offending mainstream American sensibilities. In 1974, Robin Morgan coined the phrase "pornography is the theory and rape is the practice" from her essay Theory and Practice, Pornography and Rape. She became a central figure on one of the divisive issues in feminism, particularly among anti-pornography feminists in Anglophone countries. In 1973, Robin Morgan gave the keynote speech at the West Coast Lesbian Conference, whilst married to Kenneth Pitchford, in which she criticized Beth Elliott, a performer and organizer of the conference, for being a transgender woman. In this speech, she referred to Elliott as a transsexual male and used male pronouns throughout, charging her with being an opportunist, an infiltrator, and a destroyer with the mentality of a rapist. At the end of her speech, she called for a vote on ejecting Elliott, with over 2/3 voting to allow her to remain. However, the minority threatened to disrupt the conference, and Elliott chose to leave after her performance to avoid this.
But the rehabilitation of the word witch through the feminist movement is the entire reason why you can use the word now, and it's not just automatically meaning that you are the worst of the worst, that you can be beaten in the street and it would be kind of fine and people kind of have a right because you consort with the devil. Never make a mistake about that. You can tell people that it's not actually what we do. Christians don't care. Have you seen Pagan Threat, the book, where the intro is actually written by Charlie Kirk? Yes, the late Charlie Kirk. They literally made a book about how dangerous we are with inventing stuff about what we do. And you think that you can stop the kind of fascism explaining to them that, oh, no, I'm one of the good ones, I don't do that. You think that they will care. You think that they will care listening to you when you go by witch. In 1973, we have the seminal book, Witches, Midwives and Nurses, A History of Women Healers. Guess what it is about?
In American circles in 1973, Barbara Ehrenreich and Deirdre English, journalists and writers, published Witches, Midwives and Nurses, A History of Women Healers, presenting a controversial theory. They argued that women had been persecuted as witches because their accumulated knowledge threatened the male-dominated medical establishment, particularly their understanding of the female body.
Again, when we go back and look at the Malleus Maleficarum and the fact that it identified all women as potential witches, and midwives especially, the most dangerous of them. Why? Because they were taking care of other women and they were avoiding them to, die during birth and stuff like that. And yeah, what a waste. The Unione, Donne, Italiane in the marches of '68 started to embrace the word strega as well again. Tremate, tremate, le streghe son tornate.
In Italy, activist movements advocating for the legalization of abortion and engaged in the Unione Donne Italiane, an Italian feminist association founded in 1944, drew inspiration from Michelet's vision. Their slogan was Tremate, tremate, le streghe sono tornate. Tremble, tremble, the witches have returned. Emerging from these struggles, sociologist Leopoldina Fortunati and philosopher Silvia Federici proposed a new reading of Karl Marx to explain the emergence of capitalism.
People, I just don't know. I just don't know how to tell you. Like, I've linked, of course, all the possible sources in this video, but I do feel slightly gaslighted when people tell me that no, witchcraft is not automatically political, and no, if you do witchcraft, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing activism. Because silly as I am, and autistic as I am, when you say something, I take it seriously. And so the result is, oh, no, you're factually wrong. It's not my opinion. You're factually wrong. Let me gather the receipts so that I can show you so that you can learn, because you will learn. You can ignore fact, can you? No, you apparently can, and I'm here doing this work, and I guarantee to you that there's going to be someone in the comments saying, oh, no, it's absolutely not political and absolutely doesn't need to be activism. The entire reason why the word exists and you can call yourself that is because people using that word have done the activism to allow you to use that word now. I don't even need to, hopefully, mention Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici, which, to my best knowledge, she does not identify as a witch, but I am very positive that anyone under Patriarchy will call her so. If we called Francesca Albanese for simply reporting on the state of things in Palestine because Israel is an apartheid state and is committing genocide against them, and she could be called a witch for that, I have no doubt that despite of identification, the same has been said about Silvia Federici because she offered a Marxist feminist take on the way that capitalism and patriarchy colluded to oppress women and force us in the house not to have a life otherwise. And seeing the rollback on reproductive rights, on voting rights, especially in the US, like I don't know what else you need to see that actually, you know what, not just being a witch should be activism, being a woman should be activism, but you might not mean to be an activist, but the fact that you exist and you are seen out there, it is, you might as well do something about it and understand it. Like, ignorance never helped anyone. Why would you want to ignore the history of witchcraft as activism? The history that shows you that witchcraft is activism because it's intrinsically against a system that you cannot affect, and therefore you try to affect with ways that are not codified in law. And that's the definition of activism that we saw at the beginning. Ultimately, if you're a woman, if you're not a man trademark, and I'm writing essays about it, you will understand soon enough what I mean. But let's say a woman, if you're a woman, a trans woman, a cis woman, femme in any form, patriarchy already thinks you a witch, already will call you a witch in a negative connotation to use it as a threat. So whether you like it or not, that's going to be the case. You raise your head and you are femme in any form, you're a witch. In a bad way, just like we saw with Miss Albanese.
Miss Albanese, you are a witch.
So you might as well join us in the fight. Otherwise, go fucking buy your cauldron and your wand and again cosplay as a fairy and see how much your life changes that way. My guess is not. This video has been chosen by my amazing patrons and members on Ko-fi. So if you'd like to have your say about the kind of videos and subjects that I touch upon, come and check out Patreon and Ko-fi. Now let's get into this.